Welcome, welcome, welcome to our core lesson. Today is October 1st. I'm about 10 minutes behind schedule. That's okay. We are going to get started. For our core lesson, we are going to get your notebook for note taking. Preferably, you're taking notes in the same place that you were taking notes in our first core lesson that happened on Tuesday. So once you get these materials ready, we are going to dive in very, very shortly. I'm going to give just a little bit of time for you to gather what you need, and we are going to move forward. So today, really, I have this awesome collection of information to share with you. And, I was so inspired by all the questions that you wrote in our Monday Do Now. This is a time in our lives that is a part of history. And this is the one disconnect that often I found when I was a history or social studies or students or civic student, was that I couldn't really make the connection of how our life um, qualifies as moments in history. And I say this, I use the word qualify as history because oftentimes everything that we do is historical. But it is up to society and people who say this moment in history is significant because. Now, this moment in history is significant for many reasons. We are at this precipice, if you will, where we are confronted not just with the election in about a month. Okay, today's the 1st. That means that we have a month and 3 days left or less until our election. So not only do we have the election coming up, we are dealing with climate change issues such as the fires that are going on. Many of us who woke up this morning woke up to a very orange sun. We are dealing with all of these elements of thinking, how is climate change affecting our daily life? How does our vote help us in creating action to support not just our earth, but the people on it and creating a sustainable and livable world? All of these things, not just the environment and politics and social, they all come together. And really, this is where we can make some big connections in thinking, wow, learning about the government isn't some boring class. This has to do with me. This has to do with you. This has to do with your future. And, making that additional connection to our do now that we had for this morning, not just for Monday, but for this morning, we really were thinking about, well, how do well, now I'm having a blank, so excuse me for that. But our connection is really thinking, how can we make changes, and what are our roles as students and as citizens, and how does learning about the government help fulfill this duty as a civics learner? So this lesson today, we're going to get going. Let's do a quick review. We have our systems of government. How many systems do we have? 3. We've got 3 systems. So really, we are looking at our legislative system, which is the branch of government that makes the laws, okay? So obviously, there are people who are writing laws. There is a way to introduce a bill, and we will go into detail of how bills become laws, but not today. We know that the legislative branch of government is our Congress, and Congress is made up of our 2 legislative parts. We have our Senate and our House of Representatives. If we're using our language from that we started with in science, this is our 3 subsystems within our government system, right? Legislative branch is a subsystem. The Senate is another subsystem within a subsystem. So really the Senate, and I love this graphic because it really clearly shows us. So the Senate is very different than the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives has been elected by us, and we have in total in the whole United States, there are 435 elected representatives in total. And yes, we make the elections. We elect our House of Representatives. We vote on who we want as our senators and who we want as our House of Representatives. This is why you hear people saying that it's not just about the presidential debate, right? Because the presidential debate, the president election, not I'm using the word debate because we have the debate on our minds, but it's very different than the presidential branch, otherwise known as the executive branch. It isn't all about the president. The president, and this is what makes America so unique, the president does not hold all the power. If you ever hear a president say that they hold all the power, that is the biggest falsehood you could possibly ever say. Because America was built on this system of checks and balances. Not one single branch is responsible for all the power. Keep this in mind as we are going to be moving forward through our focal question, okay? Now, really, we have we talked about our legislative branch, our first system of government. We've talked about our second branch, the executive branch of government. And this includes the president, the vice president, and the cabinet, okay? So, as you know, the president chooses a highly qualified person, or a person who should be highly qualified, to become the vice president, and he or she or they also choose their cabinet, because like we said, smart people are smart because they surround themselves with other smart people. And if you have cabinet members leaving, it's probably for a reason. And there's a lot that comes into play when you are a leader. It's not all about you. The president is not the one with all the power. They're surrounding themselves with this cabinet, and in the hopes of having a really robust team so that you can make informed decisions. One person does not know everything in the world. This is why we jigsaw certain things. This is why we identify what our strengths are, what our passions are, and this is why there's so many different possibilities of what you can do out in the world. Now, just because a president selects a cabinet does not mean that those cabinet members are automatically brought into the White House. They have to be approved by the Senate, okay? Now, you might be asking, why the Senate? Why not the House of Representatives? Why is it not up to the American people? These are all great questions. I'm wondering these questions as well. Especially we're going to come down and do some really deep looking at the Senate, the House of Representatives, and what happens when power is kind of teetering between parties. And when I say between parties, I mean the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, okay? Now, the third branch of government is our judicial branch. This is the branch that evaluates laws. It brings laws to the court systems. The court systems travel up. We've got our circuit courts, we've got our local courts, we've got higher courts that eventually, if you keep going up, you will take it to the Supreme Court. And as we know, this is a big one, right? We have 9 justices. And they must be approved once again. Here we see the Senate again. And there has to be at least 50, at least 51 votes. So Quincy just said that her sister watches The West Wing and was wondering how the people who work there are categorized. This is Interesting. So, are you talking about like working in the White House? How do people function in their work? Be a little bit more specific, but that is a great question. Okay, so let's keep moving forward because here is where, as students, as citizens, as future voters, as civicologists. I don't even know if that's a thing. People who study civics. Uh, you all had so many incredible questions. I was I'll tell you all the feelings I was having. I was proud, I was overwhelmed, I was so inspired by all of these questions. And so really I wanted to give a moment where we glanced and read all of these questions together. So as students and citizens, I asked you on Monday, what do you want to know about the election process and our government? And look at all of these incredible questions. I'm going to quickly read them out because really I want us to hear these, let these sink in. And there's a few of these that I do want to at least just, there's a few things that there's a little bit of a clarification that we'll come to. So let's take a look. Marcos asked, I want to know why Donald Trump picked a white man to replace RBG. So this is a good first one. So Donald Trump has not picked a white man. He picked a woman who is white, and her name is Amy, and I'm blanking out on her last name. He had made a selection to pick a white woman. Now, we know that Congress needs to vote on whether or not um, we are going to be having a hearing. And the thing is, to become a Supreme Court justice, there's a lot going in there. And it is not just simply the president saying, I choose this person, and then Congress voting. It doesn't work that simply. It is much more complex. There are hearings involved where Congress gets to ask questions and really make sure that this person is highly qualified to be on our Supreme Court. Jack wants to know what the Electoral College is, and also, is the Senate diverse? Peter and Genevieve asked, why do we need a president? Milton Rigo Dash asked, who is going to take over Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Who is Trump going to elect? There is a lot writing on this, and I know many of us are super interested. And what we're going to do is have a day where we talk entirely about the process of, how a new Supreme Court justice comes into play, and knowing that it may not be Trump electing a new Supreme Court leader. It really depends on many things right now. There are a lot of disagreements that Trump should not be the one choosing, and that Congress should not be voting, especially since the election has already begun. This is a highly contentious issue. And so many of you, I can tell, are paying close attention. Kaylin and Andre asked, what happens to the person who does not become president? Do they get another chance? This is an excellent question. Nikita wants to know what is going to happen to all the mail ballots. So we know that there are some issues right now with, the mail, with COVID and all of these things. So absolutely, we'll talk about that. Ava asked, why is Trump suing states because they are voting by mail? And she also wanted to know, why doesn't Trump like people of color? I think that, if we're going to be sticking to this question, why doesn't Trump like people of color, is more of a issue of morality and ethics than it is specifically about the election process and our government. However, that being said, if somebody is, and I will say that most of, and I love this. Thank you. Amy Barrett is the Supreme Court nominee put forward through Trump. So thank you so much, Ava, for that. And then Quincy just threw out a really, and when it comes down to it, this is strong evidence. Yes, over 90%, or I would say the majority, because I'm not going to confirm that until I do my own research, but I do know that the majority of Trump's voters were white, especially white women. I believe over 60% of white women, even this includes college educated, uh, voted for Trump. There are a lot of really interesting research groups that are studying types of people and their likelihood of voting for a certain candidate. So these are all really great questions, and how, like, if you're interested in sociology and the study of how people vote or how people show up and do things, there are people who are doing this data analysis, and it is very helpful for us as a country to understand the deep rooted racism that is a part of our government, a part of our constitution, a part of our nation's upbringing. And these are things that we are going to be talking about even further. And it is so important we talk about it. Because another thing is, why doesn't Trump like people of color? He won't come out and say, I don't like people of color, but his actions, time and time again, have showed us how he is feeling. On the debate stage, he told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. This is rhetoric, words used to show support for white supremacists, for Nazis. Proud Boys is a group of like neo white supremacists. There are lots of other groups that are against anybody who is not white. So this includes people who are Jewish. This includes people who are from immigrant families. These are against people with who are Muslim. He has showed that he has no issue with treating people of color poorly. And when he was given the opportunity to say, I denounce white supremacists, he could not say those words. So what does that tell us about him? You guys are really tuned in to these larger things. We have so many questions, so many more questions. So take a look. How do people break the law and get away with it? So this kind of comes back to this idea of like, how can we make sure our power is correct and upheld? What kind of power is being used? This is still connected to that. Why, Summer wanted to know, why do people who are wealthy often get elected or often run for office? And this is a powerful question, because it has to do with something that many people don't talk about that often, in the sense of campaign finances. To run, for a campaign, to run an election campaign, you have to have a certain amount of money to be able to get people to make phone calls for you, to make printouts, to provide advertisements on TV, things like that. Juno wants to know how the election process works, and when does the president get started working? Ooh, these are so good. Miracle wants to know, what will the state do when Donald Trump loses and does not exit peacefully? Do kids affect the votes? So some of these we're going to have to take more time to answer. Alma and Adrian wanted to know, how can a presidential candidate lose even if they get the most votes? And then I kind of will skip down and take a look. Adrian even went so far as finding the amount total votes for each candidate, and he was saying, how is it possible if Hillary Clinton got nearly 3 million more votes than Donald Trump? How is that possible? And this comes back to the Electoral College. Now, just to be clear, you're not taking these notes. You're not taking notes on these. In a moment, we are going to start taking notes. But, and then I know we're going to be a little bit behind with our writing group, so be patient with me. This is going to be really, really valuable. So let's take a look at our focus question. Read this out loud with me. How does the Constitution determine who has power in our government? How does the Constitution determine who has power in our government? So this is where we're going to start taking notes. okay? This is where I would like for you to write down the focus question. And then I'm going to give a little bit of time as I kind of walk through this, but you are going to write this down and we're going to go through. I want to have you set up your question because we are going to answer this by taking notes. There are 3 powers that are outlined in our Constitution. How does the Constitution determine who has power in our government? So there are 3 places that the Constitution recognizes power. Now, this word power is huge for many reasons. You know that I've said on multiple occasions, how are you going to use that power? What kind of leader do we want in our community, in our state, in our whole federal country government system? How do we want people using their power? And how does our government really allow power? So the first part of this is going over and saying, not that way. Sorry, guys. Okay. Here we go. So we have 3 powers within the Constitution. Okay? Now, the Constitution says that in the first place that gets power is our federal and state governments. Federal means the whole country at large, okay? So the Constitution provides for a federal and state system of government, okay? So the government is really saying that the whole country does not have all the power. And we will be doing a deep dive and seeing how the states finally stepped up and said, actually, we need to be able to make choices for ourselves. It's not fair for government all the way in Washington, D.C. to make these decisions that are so personal to me. So really what we're thinking of is, as an example, the federal government is responsible for things that state government can't do. And the state government is really responsible for things that the federal government can't do. So we're going to take note on some examples of this because that's the best way for us to really understand how power shows up in these systems. And so really one example is, well, state government allows us to really, we're able to make laws on education. So even if Donald Trump said every kid needs to go back to school, even if he says that, does he have the power to enforce that? No. The state government has the legal powers when it comes to marriage. Think about gay rights marriage. This is up to each state. There are states still in this country that do not allow gay marriage. The inverse of marriage is divorce. So laws about divorce is handled, like if your parents are divorced and who gets time where and how are certain things split up. Not just that, police reforms. When we talk about the defund the police movement, we're talking about, as a state, ways in which we can take money from police and give it to education or mental health issues, things of that nature. Now, with federal government, they make big decisions on, let's say, money. States cannot print out their own money. They cannot do that. That comes from the federal government, okay? Other examples, state governments cannot declare war. That is not within the state's power. This is something that only lies in federal. Declaring war. Not just that, but also they can control trade between the states of certain goods. Consider California feeds most of the nation. I would say that California produces, at least 60% of produce for the whole nation and even beyond. So really this lies not just in California, it's up to the government of certain trade laws that exist. So note how power is laid out. The state government controls things that the federal government does not. The federal government controls things that the state government cannot. This is one way that our Constitution gives us power. So if we say as a state, I'm so sorry, we're not ready to go back to school yet because of COVID, we need to make sure that we have our own plan in place. This is where local government comes into play. This is where our governor, Gavin Newsom, has made some very serious steps in making sure that teachers, families, students are safe. Okay? Now let's keep on looking. The Senate. Ooh. Representative of the people, the Senate and House of Representatives. Okay? This is another place where power exists. Now, this is also, this came up for some of us. Eloise really asked questions. She felt like is the Senate truly representative of its people? Well, if each state only gets 2 reps, per state, well, what if like one state only has 1 million people? And California, I think, has like, gosh, of course I'm gonna, just for the sake of making things up, but knowing that this is not an actual true number, I'm gonna say, let's say that there is 500 million. There are 500 more people than in this state, but guess what? We still only get 2 reps, even though some of the smaller states get 2 as well. So this is one way where we have to ask ourselves, is this truly representative of power? House of Representatives is a bit different, okay? So the House of Representatives, or the lower house, is based on what I was just talking about, on the population of the state, okay? Now, this is important to think about. Consider, is the House of Representatives a proportionate representation of the people? Think about what we just said, okay? Because if you're like, how does the Senate truly represent us if we only get 2 reps and we have the majority? We're the 5th largest economy in the world, not in the United States, in the world. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. Is it fair we only get 2 representatives? In my humble opinion, absolutely not. I have problems with the Senate. And this is something that as we start looking in our history, where are ways that we can truly understand what were our government systems, or what was the power structure like when this was first made, and how has this changed over time? Okay? So, Senate, all states get 2 reps. House of Rep is by population. Okay? The last piece of this, okay, and thank you so much. We're going on that 30-minute mark, and I am so proud of you for sticking in it. If you've been sitting this whole time, be sure to take care of yourselves. Do a little neck roll, a couple deep belly breaths as we wrap up this very last bit of note taking. And your exit ticket is going to be uploading a photo of your notes. Okay? So our checks and balances system really is the root of the power. Okay? Because really the whole aspect of, well, I won't say the whole aspect, but the whole point of the United States of America's democracy is, in a sense, checks and balances. We are not a dictatorship. A dictatorship is where one person makes the decision. One person has the power. We have a complex, this is my favorite made up word. It's complex and comprehensive put together. My complexive. We have a complexive system at work here to make sure that power does not exist in one aspect, one branch of government. So where our power is really the federal government shares its power. So remember we talked about how the federal government is really in charge of certain things. Well, even the federal government has been split up so that it doesn't have more power than the state, for example. So federal is split up into has three branches that it has to share the power between. Okay? We have our executive. You remember that handy note picture from before? That's our president, vice president, and our cabinet. We've got our legislative branch, makes the laws, or votes on them, excuse me, and then the judicial. Okay, so they write the laws. Judicial always reflects on the laws itself. Now, the branches all have limited power, okay, so that they can be constantly checked by one another. Now, by separating the power among the three areas, okay, this really ensures or is set up with the goal being that no branch can become too powerful. So that, in essence, is called the system of checks and balances. Now, we've gone through a lot. So considering all of these ways that power shows up by or through our Constitution, we're kind of getting a sense of where injustices are. Where injustices are, where injustices have occurred. And if you're still like, not sure about that, great. Let's keep on asking questions and looking back in our history to get a sense of power, how people in history have used power, and how power really can determine how history is made and how history occurs. So with that, we are going to end our lesson today. Oh, you deserve a huge pat on the back, maybe double, triple pat on the back for making it through our lesson today. And I will be sure to add our exit ticket up very shortly, but it is just noting that you have taken notes and written them down. Quincy, I'm giving you that bonus. You're going to look up who our California representatives are for us, okay? Because I think that is such a great question to ask. So